I think this is an important difference, it seems to me, between the situation in the case of the advanced capitalist countries, or even the case of Japan on the one hand, and in the case of countries like India and possibly even China at the moment. In the case of the advanced capitalist countries, when they went out for the global reach, basically the import of all kinds of primary commodities, and imposed on the world a pattern of international division of labor where they were exporting manufactured goods and importing primary commodities, for which the theoretical rationale was provided by Ricardo and of course was carried over in the struggle against the Corn Laws. The basic idea was that free import of primary commodities, notably food grains, may lead to a displacement of domestic production, and would lead to a displacement of domestic production, and may even give rise to a certain amount of internal social opposition. But this internal social opposition is something which could be overcome very fast because of a number of possibilities that were open to them, primary among those possibilities being emigration from the metropolis, from Britain, from Europe to the New World. In fact, there were some years in which anything up to 1 to 2% of Europe's population simply migrated in that particular year. And this happened over stretches of time which were by no means very short. As a result, you had that possibility that the imperialist project was itself associated with the creation of opportunities that gave rise to a social consensus around it. When we come later on to the case of Japan, for instance, there is, as you know, a debate in the context of Japan. Many people argue that in the case of Japan, the global reach, or if you like, the kind of imperialist expansion of Japan into countries like Korea was necessitated by the agrarian impasse inside Japan itself, which gave rise to the food riots and so on, and as a result, the crisis of the shortage of agrarian products was overcome because of this kind of a reach. As against this, a lot of people like Hayami, for instance, argue that no, the crisis itself was caused by this global reach, that in effect, because Japan went and obtained cheap goods from South Korea or from Korea, you actually had a situation where the Japanese agricultural sector itself ran into a crisis and could not sustain its levels of production. 98% of Japanese budget, this is after the murder of Takahashi, 97 to 98% of the Japanese budget was devoted to military expenditures. Therefore, the capacity to draw in large numbers of distressed petty producers into the armed forces is something which was a part of the imperialist project itself, provided a kind of safety valve, apart from the fact that, of course, industrialization itself was somewhat labor absorbing even in that particular period. Now, the point I wish to make is that in developing Asia, if a country like India wishes to have a reach, in that case, there would have to be a pattern of division of labor whereby India would have to be an importer of a variety of primary commodities, agricultural goods and so on, which are very similar to those which are produced inside the country itself. As a result, you would have a situation where such a global reach on the part of India would be associated with a distress and displacement as far as vast numbers of peasants and petty producers inside the country are concerned. And as far as they are concerned, the capacity for absorbing them, whether by resettling them in newer open areas, whether by absorbing them into the growing industry, which may become possible to the extent you can find markets outside in developing Asia, or the capacity to absorb them into a military adventure, all these are extremely limited. As a result, the kind of social consensus that advanced countries, including late advanced countries like Japan, could gather around their global expansion program is a kind of consensus that would elude a country like India, and I suspect also a country like China. Now, this is something which is visible directly. I mean, that for instance, to the extent that the Indo-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement permits, because of India's desire for a global reach, the argument put forward in the cabinet meet to support the Indo-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, according to newspaper reports, is that it is a part of India's Look East policy. In other words, it is very much a part of India's strategy of a global reach, especially reach into developing Asia. On the other hand, this is something which necessarily would entail the import of a variety of primary commodities into India, and that is something which is going to cause great distress as far as a lot of petty producers, for instance, in a state like Kerala, in which I am currently located, are concerned. As a result, the kind of consensus that such a policy of reach could acquire in the case of the traditional imperialist countries, the kind of consensus that's going to elude a country like India. And that is a phenomenon which is going to necessarily restrict the prospects of such a policy of global reach as far as India is concerned. I think there's a remarkable difference. I mean, I think there are two differences I want to draw your attention to. The first difference is that in the period in which we had non-alignment, the whole argument behind non-alignment was that we stand for the rights of every country to pursue the economic policy of its own. In other words, we would stand for dirigism elsewhere. We would stand for protectionism elsewhere. We would stand for countries to pursue their national economic policies in opposition to traditionally what we know as imperialism. Well, at the moment, the argument is shifting to one where we say that we can give you, I mean, at the most we say we can give you a better deal than the Americans can. Refer us to the Americans. In other words, we are not, as it were, fighting for the rights of the countries to get out of imperialist frameworks, but in fact we are fighting to have frameworks in which we are somewhat better placed, in which we claim that we provide greater advantages than the traditional imperialist countries to some of these countries. I think a very significant change that is taking place in India's attitude towards developing Asia and indeed other developing countries. That change is associated with another change which is very clearly noticeable. Originally, when we argued for a high rate of growth, the argument used to be that basically it will give rise to a trickle down as far as the poor are concerned. Now that is something which was disproved by experience. Subsequently, there was a shift in the argument, which for instance you find in the approach paper to the 11th five-year plan of the Government of India, that all right, there may not be a trickle down, but if you have a high growth rate, then it's possible for the government to intervene fiscally to actually garner larger resources for benefiting the poor. In other words, it's not an automatic process. But of course, a high growth rate makes it possible through government intervention that a trickle down or some kind of a redistribution can be managed, can be engineered through state intervention. So this desire to be a major world player is something which is not because of any venality on the part of the Indian big bourgeoisie, but this desire for being a major world player is, if I may say so, something which Hilferding and Lenin talked about. I think it's intrinsic to the nature of finance capital. It's intrinsic to the nature of finance capital, as Hilferding said and Lenin said, that finance capital seeks domination. That essentially once you're integrated into the phenomenon of globalized finance, the desire for domination is actually intrinsic to that integration. And as a result, what we are seeing today maybe, I'm sure there are very excellent papers that ERF economists would have produced, maybe many of the developing Asian countries might be better off having a relationship with India or with China than having a relationship with the United States. But on the other hand, this is something which, as far as India internally is concerned, is going to give rise to an accentuation of the distress of large segments of peasants and petty producers. And this again is something which is not going, I mean, It's part of the phenomenon of our contemporary integration into international finance capital, which basically would mean that there is a desire for domination without necessarily even acquiring the kind of benefits for the bulk of the people that traditional imperialism had ensured. In the current period of globalization, high growth or larger economic strength of economies like India is associated with greater impoverishment as far as small producers, petty producers, and working class laboring poor are concerned. And I think this desire for a global reach, especially in developing Asia, actually carries that dichotomy forward. It is something whose impact on developing India is what concerns me greatly. Thank you.